They mocked the jagged, silver scar that ran down her forearm and the quiet way she carried her pain. But they would soon learn that her scars were a map of their salvation, and her silence was a monument to heroes they could never be. They would learn that the woman they saw as a broken servant was, in fact, a guardian angel who had once walked through fire, and the man who recognized her was the very commander she had pulled from its flames. The air in Apex Shooting Center was a thick cocktail of scents and sounds, a unique perfume Anya Sharma had come to associate with a fragile kind of peace. It smelled of burnt gunpowder, cleaning solvent, and the faint, metallic tang of spent brass casings. The sounds were a percussive symphony. The sharp crack of a rifle, the deeper boom of a shotgun, and the rhythmic pop-pop-pop of pistols, all layered over the constant, humming drone of the ventilation system. For most, it was a cacophony. For Anya, it was a controlled, predictable form of chaos, a world away from the unpredictable mayhem she had left behind. She moved through the facility with an economy of motion that belied the slight, almost imperceptible limp in her right leg. Her posture was erect, her eyes constantly scanning the shooting lanes, her presence a quiet authority that most patrons instinctively respected. As a range safety officer, her job was simple: keep people from doing stupid things that could get themselves or others hurt. It was a role that required vigilance and patience, two qualities she possessed in abundance. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a tight, functional bun, and her uniform, a simple black polo shirt and khaki pants, was always immaculate. She spoke only when necessary, her voice calm and even, cutting through the din without ever having to be raised. This quiet life was a deliberate choice. It was an anesthetic. The routine, the rules, the black and white nature of firearm safety. It was all a balm on a soul that had seen too much gray. Here, the dangers were clear, the protocols absolute. There were no ambushes hiding in the mundane, no moral ambiguities lurking in the corners. There was only the target, the firearm, and the space between. It was a world she could manage, a world that asked nothing of her past. But her past was written on her body in a language few could read. The most prominent script was the scar on her right forearm, a brutal, silvery track of tissue that snaked from her elbow to her wrist, a permanent reminder of twisted metal and searing heat. Then there was the limp, a ghost of an injury that ached on cold days and served as a constant, low-level reminder of a fall that should have ended everything. She hid these things as best she could, not out of shame, but out of a deep-seated desire for anonymity. She did not want to be a story. She just wanted to be Anya, the quiet woman who handed you your eye protection and reminded you to keep your muzzle pointed downrange. Unfortunately, anonymity was a luxury not everyone was willing to grant. Well, look what we have here. It's Sergeant Sullen, a voice boomed, dripping with condescending mirth. Anya did not flinch. She finished wiping down the counter, her movements deliberate and unhurried, before turning to face the source of the disruption. It was Chad, flanked by his two usual sycophants, Kyle and Brandon. They were a weekly affliction, a trio of tech executives who treated the shooting range like their personal clubhouse. They were loud, ostentatious, and possessed an arrogance that seemed to radiate from their expensive watches and designer tactical gear. Chad was the worst of them. He was a man whose confidence had been purchased, not earned, a walking embodiment of unearned privilege. He saw Anya's quiet professionalism not as a sign of competence, but as a weakness to be prodded. Her scars, her limp, her refusal to engage with his boorish attempts at banter. He interpreted it all as a personal challenge. "Lighten up, Anya," Chad said, leaning against the counter, his smile failing to reach his cold eyes. "You always look like you're attending a funeral. Is it so bad having to watch real men handle their equipment?" Kyle and Brandon snickered on cue, a well-rehearsed chorus of derision. Anya simply slid a sign-in sheet and a waiver toward them. "Fill this out, please, and I need to see your membership cards." "Always with the rules," Chad scoffed, though he began scribbling on the form. "You know, my company is about to close a 9-figure deal. I don't have time for this paperwork nonsense." He gestured vaguely at her arm. "What happened there, anyway? Get a little too close to the office shredder. The question hung in the air, sharp and cruel. A few other patrons glanced over, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, before quickly looking away. The other range officer, a young man named Dave, suddenly found the floor intensely interesting. The manager, Frank, a man whose spine seemed to be made of jelly, retreated into his glass-walled office, pretending to be absorbed in a spreadsheet. This was the silent pact of the community. Chad and his friends brought in a lot of money, so their behavior was tolerated. Their cruelty was the price of their patronage, and it was a price Anya was expected to pay in silence. She felt a familiar, cold knot tighten in her stomach. It was the feeling of being seen but not understood, of being judged by people who couldn't possibly comprehend the world she came from. It was a quiet, suffocating injustice. She had faced down armed men in the dead of night, held the hands of dying soldiers, and pushed her body to its absolute breaking point in the service of a cause greater than herself. Now, she was being mocked by a man whose greatest battle was probably a poor quarterly earnings report. She refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "Lane 7 is open," she said, her voice a flat, emotionless plain. "Remember to keep all rounds on your own target this time." Chad's face soured. Her refusal to be baited was, to him, the ultimate insult. He snatched the lane marker from her hand. "Whatever you say, Sarge," he sneered, the honorific now a clear insult. "Just try not to trip over your own feet while you're watching us." As they swaggered toward their lane, Anya allowed herself a slow, controlled exhale. She could feel the stares of the other people in the room. The pity, the discomfort, the relief that the attention was not on them. She ignored it all and returned to her duties. Her placid exterior a carefully constructed fortress around the swirling storm of memory and indignation within. The peace she had so carefully curated was, once again, shattered. The day wore on, and the incident with Chad's group settled into a low, simmering tension that permeated the entire facility. Anya continued her rounds, her focus absolute. She corrected a shooter's grip, advised another on clearing a jam, and swept up piles of warm brass casings, all with the same detached efficiency. But beneath the surface, a battle was raging. Part of her, the part that had been forged in the crucible of combat, screamed for confrontation. Discipline, respect, and order were not suggestions. They were the pillars that separated life from death. To see them so casually desecrated by men like Chad was a personal affront. But another part of her, the weary, wounded part, just wanted quiet. She had fought her war. She had earned her peace. Engaging with Chad was a fool's errand. It would only lead to more noise, more conflict, and a potential threat to the fragile stability she had built for herself. So she endured, her silence a shield against their ignorance. The escalation, when it came, was as predictable as it was dangerous. Anya was observing the pistol range from her designated station when she saw it. Kyle, egged on by Chad, was attempting a rapid-fire drill far beyond his skill level. In his haste, his grip faltered. As he brought his pistol back on target, the muzzle swept carelessly across the adjacent lane, flagging the shooter next to him. Time seemed to slow down for Anya. Her training, deeply ingrained in her nervous system, took over. Before the other shooter could even react, before Frank could emerge from his office, Anya was moving. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. "Cease fire. Cease fire on lane 8. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a diamond-hard edge of command that cut through everything. It was a voice that expected and received immediate compliance. Kyle froze, his eyes wide. Chad, however, turned to face her, a defiant smirk on his face. "Relax, sweetheart. It was a little mistake. No harm, no foul." The firearm was pointed in an unsafe direction, Anya stated, her gaze fixed on Kyle, but her words meant for Chad. "That is a major safety violation. You will unload and show clear, and step away from the firing line." "Or what?" Chad challenged, stepping in front of Kyle. "You're going to give me a timeout? I'm a paying customer here. This is supposed to be fun. We're not in the army, lady." He then did something so reckless, so deliberately provocative, that it sucked the air out of the room. He took his own pistol, which he had just reloaded, and with a theatrical, slow-motion movement, let its muzzle drift toward the ceiling, far outside the safe angle of the backstop. It was a blatant act of defiance, a middle finger to her authority and to the safety of everyone present. "See? Just a little fun," he said, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. Anya felt a surge of cold, white-hot fury. This was no longer about disrespect. This was about a fundamental breach of the one code that mattered in this place. He was treating a deadly weapon like a toy to win a petty argument. In her old world, such an act would have had immediate, severe consequences. Here, she felt a profound sense of helplessness. Her authority was derived from a polo shirt and a name tag, not from rank and regulation. She wrestled with the conflict tearing through her. She could back down, let the manager handle it with a weak slap on the wrist, and preserve her quiet existence. Or she could uphold the standard, the one thing she still believed in, even if it meant blowing her carefully constructed anonymity to pieces. She thought of the men she had served with, men who had trusted their lives to the discipline of their comrades. She thought of the weight of responsibility she had carried on her shoulders. She would not let this stand. "Your lane is closed," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Your membership is suspended. Pack your gear and leave. Now." It was at that exact moment, as Chad's face contorted with rage, and he opened his mouth to unleash a torrent of abuse, that a new figure entered the range. He moved with a purpose and a quiet power that immediately set him apart. He was a tall man, lean and wiry, with the kind of physical conditioning that spoke of years of relentless discipline. His face was weathered, carved by sun and hardship, and his eyes, a startlingly pale blue, missed nothing. They swept the room, taking in the scene with a quick, analytical glance. The enraged customer, the two smirking lackeys, the impotent manager hovering uselessly by his office door, and the lone female range officer standing her ground with a rigid, unshakable calm. He did not know the particulars of the dispute, but he recognized the archetypes instantly. He had seen bullies like Chad on every continent, and he had seen warriors like Anya in the most dangerous places on earth. Her stance, her controlled breathing, the way she held her ground without aggression but with absolute finality. It was a bearing he knew well. It was the posture of someone who had faced far worse than an angry man with an inflated ego. Disgust for Chad's group coiled in his gut. He had no tolerance for such undisciplined arrogance, especially around firearms. He chose a lane a few stalls down from the commotion, intending to practice in peace but keeping a watchful eye on the situation. As he set down his gear bag, the confrontation reached its climax. "You can't suspend me," Chad bellowed, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent range. "I'll have your job, Frank. Get out here and fire this pathetic washout." Anya stood her ground, her expression unreadable. To enforce the suspension, she had to step forward and press the lane control button on the console. As she moved, the sleeve of her polo shirt, already taut across her toned bicep, rode up a few inches on her forearm. For a moment, a piece of her history was laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights. The ugly, puckered scar tissue was visible, but so was something else, something nestled within it. It was a faded tattoo, partially obscured by the healed wound but still discernible to a trained eye. It depicted a pair of green footprints, angel wings sprouting from their heels, all enclosed within a red cross. The man with the pale blue eyes saw it, and he froze. His hands, which had been methodically unpacking magazines, stopped moving. His breath caught in his chest. His analytical gaze sharpened into one of stunned, visceral recognition. The world around him seemed to melt away, the sounds of the range fading into a distant hum. All he could see was that tattoo, those green feet. He knew what they meant. Every special operator in the American military knew what those green feet signified. They were the symbol of the Air Force pararescue jumpers, the PJs. They were the angels who descended from the sky into the depths of hell to bring soldiers home. The confrontation was still escalating. Frank had finally scurried out of his office, his face pale and sweating. Now, Chad. Let's all just calm down. Anya, perhaps you're being a little hasty. But the tall man was already moving. He strode forward, his presence radiating an aura of command that silenced everyone in his path. He ignored Chad. He ignored Frank. He walked directly to Anya, his eyes locked on her forearm. He stopped a respectful distance away, and his voice, when he spoke, cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. It was quiet, but it carried the weight of mountains. "Ma'am," he began, his tone formal and imbued with a profound respect that was utterly alien in this context. He nodded toward her arm. "Those green feet. Pararescue." Anya stiffened, caught off guard. All the fight drained out of her, replaced by a cold dread. This was what she had feared most. The unearthing. The discovery. She gave a short, clipped nod, her throat suddenly tight. "A long time ago," she managed to say, hoping the brevity of her response would end the inquiry. But for the man, her confirmation was not an end. It was a key unlocking a vault of memories sealed by trauma and time. His pale blue eyes seemed to look right through her, into the past. He saw not a shooting range in a sterile American suburb, but the jagged, hostile terrain of the Korangal Valley in Afghanistan. He smelled not gunpowder, but the acrid smoke of a burning Humvee and the coppery scent of blood. The name on the tip of his tongue was a ghost. "Viper 3, he said, his voice now thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "We were on patrol. Ambush from a ridgeline. An IED took out our lead vehicle. We were pinned down, taking heavy fire." His eyes refocused on Anya, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes, the steel in her spine, the map of pain on her arm. "Our corpsman was hit in the first volley. We had multiple critical casualties. We were losing. We thought we were going to be overrun." He took a half-step closer, his gaze intense. Then the Pedro bird came. The fire was too hot to land. The hoist was damaged. But you came down anyway. You came for us. Chad, Frank, and everyone else in the room stood like statues, their petty drama instantly rendered insignificant. They were eavesdropping on a conversation from another world, spoken in a language of sacrifice they did not understand. Chad's face, which had been a mask of smug fury, was now slack-jawed with confusion. The man's name was Jackson Thorne, Commander Jackson Thorne, United States Navy. He was the leader of SEAL Team 6's most decorated squadron. And the memory he was recounting was the darkest day of his career, a day that should have been his last. "You," Thorne said, his voice cracking slightly, "you were the PJ. You landed right in the kill zone. You saved my lieutenant's life with a field tracheotomy while returning fire with your sidearm." He pointed a trembling finger at the scar on her arm. "And you got that pulling Sergeant Rico Diaz out of the wreckage of the Humvee. The vehicle was on fire. Ammunition was cooking off inside. You went in anyway." Anya's carefully constructed walls were crumbling. She could hear the whine of the helicopter's turbines, feel the grit of the Afghan dust in her teeth. She remembered Rico's screams. She remembered the intense, searing heat as a piece of shrapnel tore through her arm. She remembered the long jump from the hovering bird, the impact that sent a shockwave of agony up her leg, an injury that would linger for the rest of her life. Commander Thorne seemed to sense her distress, but he knew this story had to be told. He turned away from her and faced the silent, gaping audience. He swept his gaze over Chad's dumbfounded face, over Frank's ashen one, and over the curious onlookers. His voice now lost its personal, emotional tremor and took on the formal, resonant tone of a commanding officer delivering a citation. "You people have no idea who you are in the presence of," he began, his voice ringing with righteous power. "This isn't just Anya, the range officer. This is Master Sergeant Anya Sharma, retired United States Air Force. She is a pararescueman, one of the most elite combat medics in the world. He took a step, pacing like a panther before the crowd. She served 4 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. This woman has jumped from planes into active war zones, scuba dived to rescue pilots from downed aircraft, and rappelled from helicopters into the heart of the fight more times than most people have had a hot meal. "The ugly scar one of you so crudely pointed out," he said, his eyes boring into Chad, "was earned while saving the life of a United States Marine. The limp you find so amusing is the result of her choosing to jump 30 feet onto rocky terrain to save my team, because waiting for a safe extraction was not an option." The air in the room grew thick with a collective, suffocating shame. Chad had gone from pale to a sickly shade of green. His friends, Kyle and Brandon, seemed to be trying to shrink into themselves, to become invisible. "This woman," Thorne continued, his voice rising in a crescendo of indignation and pride, "is the recipient of 2 Bronze Star medals for valor. She holds 4 Purple Hearts, meaning she was wounded in combat on 4 separate occasions and returned to the fight. And she is the recipient of the Air Force Cross, the second highest award for valor that can be bestowed upon a member of the Air Force, for her actions on the day she saved my men." He turned back to Anya, his expression softening once more. "We all thought you died, Sergeant. Your name was on the initial casualty list. We held a memorial for you at Bagram." Anya finally found her voice, though it was little more than a whisper. The fortress had been breached, the storm was loose, and all that was left was the raw, vulnerable truth. "I was just doing my job, sir." Her words, so simple, so humble, were like a physical blow to everyone who had ever disrespected her. They highlighted the immense chasm between her character and theirs. She had walked through hell and called it the job. They had lived lives of comfort and called it success. The contrast was devastating and absolute. The silence that followed was profound. It was a silence filled with regret, awe, and a deep, gut-wrenching shame that was almost palpable. The first to break it was Frank, the manager. He stumbled forward, his face a mess of conflicting emotions. He looked from Commander Thorne's granite expression to Anya's weary, stoic face. I am so sorry, Anya," he stammered, the words tripping over themselves. "I had no idea. This is unacceptable." He spun around to face Chad, his newfound courage fueled by shame. "You, get out. All of you. Your memberships are revoked. Permanently. Get out of my facility right now." Chad didn't argue. He couldn't. His bravado had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, pathetic shell of a man. He couldn't even meet Anya's gaze. He and his friends gathered their expensive gear with clumsy, trembling hands, their earlier swagger replaced by the hunched posture of the publicly disgraced. As they scurried out the door, a wave of action rippled through the room. One by one, the other patrons, the silent bystanders who had watched the daily humiliations and done nothing, began to step forward. An older gentleman in a veteran's cap reached out and gently shook Anya's hand. "Thank you for your service, ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion. A young woman who was a regular on weekends simply said, "We're so sorry. We should have said something." Frank was wringing his hands, offering Anya a promotion to head of training, a massive raise, anything she wanted. But it was Commander Thorne who created the moment that would be seared into the memory of everyone present. He stepped directly in front of Anya, his back ramrod straight. In the middle of the crowded, civilian shooting range, the decorated Navy SEAL commander drew himself up to his full height. He raised his hand to his brow and delivered a slow, perfect military salute. It was an act of such profound respect, a gesture of honor from one warrior to another, that it transcended the setting. It was a piece of sacred ritual brought into a profane space. For a long moment, Anya just stood there, absorbing the gesture. Then something shifted within her. The pain, the anger, the years of self-imposed exile from the world she had once known. It all began to recede. Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in her eyes, blurring the image of the commander standing before her. They were not tears of sadness, but of release. Slowly, as if shaking off a decade of rust, she raised her own hand. Her movements were precise, economical, and deeply ingrained. She returned the salute, her scarred arm held steady, her gaze locked with Thorn's. In that shared moment of recognition, a circle was closed. A wound began to heal. The hidden hero was finally, painfully, beautifully seen. 6 months later, the Apex Shooting Center was a different place. The air still smelled of gunpowder and solvent, but it was now tinged with something else. A deep and abiding sense of respect. The transformation had been seismic. Anya Sharma was no longer just a range officer. She was now the Director of Veteran Outreach and Advanced Training. A grant, facilitated by a foundation with close ties to Commander Jackson Thorne, had allowed her to build a program from the ground up. She now spent her days not just enforcing safety rules, but teaching them at the highest level. She ran tactical casualty care courses for local law enforcement and provided specialized firearms training for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. Her limp was still there, a quiet companion on her rounds. Her scar was still visible on her forearm, but she no longer made any effort to hide it. It was a part of her story, and she was at last learning to tell it. She moved with a new confidence, not the loud, brittle confidence of Chad, but the deep, resonant confidence of a woman who had found her purpose once more. Her past and present were no longer at war. They were integrated, each giving strength to the other. The Wall of Heroes was Frank's idea. It now dominated the main lobby, a floor-to-ceiling display honoring service members from the local community. The centerpiece, given the place of highest honor, was a framed display dedicated to Master Sergeant Anya Sharma. It featured a professional photograph of her in her dress uniform, her Air Force Cross pinned neatly to her chest, alongside a detailed citation recounting her bravery in the Karangal Valley. The community had changed, too. The regulars at the range looked at Anya with a mixture of awe and protectiveness. The story of that day had become local legend, a cautionary tale about the dangers of judging a book by its cover. Even the story's villains had found a different path. Chad, humbled to his core by the public evisceration of his character, had sought out Commander Thorne and offered a tearful, abject apology. On Thorne's advice, he and his friends began volunteering at a local VA hospital. They spent their weekends listening to the stories of old soldiers, fetching coffee for wounded warriors, and learning the true meaning of service. They started a non-profit organization that funded adaptive sports equipment for disabled veterans, a penance that slowly transformed into a genuine passion. Chad had sent Anya a long, handwritten letter of apology, which she had read, acknowledged, and then put away. Forgiveness was a process, but she recognized the sincerity of his remorse. Heroes walk among us every day, often in the quietest corners of our lives. They are not always clad in uniforms or draped in medals. Sometimes, they wear the simple garb of a civilian job, their only uniform the invisible weight of the memories they carry. Their heroism is etched not in headlines, but in the scars they bear and the silence they keep. True strength is not found in arrogance or loud proclamations of self-worth. It is found in quiet dignity, selfless sacrifice, and the unwavering courage to do one's duty, whether in a field of battle or on the floor of a local business. The greatest honor we can pay them is to look beyond the surface, to treat every soul with respect, for we never truly know the fires they have walked through or the lives they have saved.